morning. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Disabled and Special Needs Committee. I would like to recognize that we have a quorum. President Darrell Clark, Councilman David O, Councilman Curtis Jones, and Councilwoman Jenny Blackwell was here. She went out the hallway and she'll be back momentarily. This hearing is called to order in the public hearing of City Council Committee on the Disabled and Special Needs. The purpose of the public hearing is to hear testimony regarding housing for individuals with disabilities in Philadelphia, authorized by Resolution 150028. Could you read the resolution?
Resolution number 150028, authorizing Council's Committee on the Disabled and Special Needs to hold public hearings to examine the state of housing in Philadelphia for people with physical, psychiatric, sensory, intellectual, and developmental disabilities.
Thank you to everyone for being here today as we examine the state of housing for individuals with physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. A place to call home is the cornerstone of independence. Independence and integration are among the most important values and goals shared by people with disabilities, their families, and advocates. A decent, safe, affordable home is essential to being part of the community as it opens its door to other life opportunities such as education and employment. The right to live in the community for individuals with disabilities is grounded legally in the landmark 1999 Olmstead Supreme Court decision, often referred to as the Brown versus Board of Education for the disability community. The Olmstead decision found that medically unnecessary segregation of individuals with disabilities who desire to live in the community was a violation of Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Specifically, the court ruled unjustified isolation, we hold, is properly regarded as discrimination based on disability. First, institutional placement of persons who can handle and benefit from community settings perpetuates unwarranted assumptions that persons so isolated are incapable or unworthy of participating in community life. Second, confinement in an institution severely diminishes the everyday life activities of individuals, including family relations, social contracts, work options, economic independence, educational advancement, and cultural enrichment. While progress has been made, the promise of Olmstead is yet to be fully realized. One significant barrier has been the lack of appropriate housing for people with disabilities. Across the United States, millions of people with disabilities face a severe housing crisis due to such factors as affordability, accessibility, aging caregivers, housing discrimination, and availability. The supply of affordable, accessible housing remains far less than the need. Waiting lists for housing in Philadelphia ranges from 3 years to 10 years in duration. Under Olmstead, the states can meet their obligation by developing a plan for community placements with a waiting list that moves at a reasonable pace. Waiting lists that exceed 3 years or more arguably are not moving at a reasonable pace. Therefore, it is crucial that we examine the current state of housing supports and housing development for people with disabilities. The topic is of great interest to me for two reasons. First, our work on the Philadelphia Autism Project, which just released last week, has raised many concerns. Of greatest concern and relevance to the housing discussion is the findings from the 2014 Pennsylvania Autism Census Report, which signals a looming crisis as the number of adults with autism of Pennsylvania is projected by 20,000 individuals by the year 2020. That number is proportionately relevant across the country, and it's very important, and I will overstate it if possible every time I recite that number, because once you know that number as policymakers, you have a responsibility to act. Currently, think of that 20,000 number, and the bus stops when you're 21. Pennsylvania has 600 slots for adults between the autism waiver and the ACAP program. We also know that when compared to other adults with disabilities, adults with autism are less likely to have ever lived independently and more likely to be living with a parent or guardian. So we must plan for the housing needs of this rapidly growing population. The second area of interest is the Philadelphia nursing home. Many in the disability community, including some who are testifying today, have been advocating for several years that individuals with disabilities are inappropriately placed there and can linger institutionalized for years. Olmsted is clear. Unnecessary segregation due to the lack of appropriate community-based placements for individuals with disabilities is a violation of the ADA. Therefore, we must actively work to remedy this situation. The experts testifying today will highlight the impact of this housing crisis on Philadelphians living with disabilities. They'll outline how Philadelphia has been a leader in developing models that work, and also how we're continuing to come up short in meeting the needs of Philadelphians living with disabilities. They will provide concrete strategies for moving forward to ensure Philadelphia is in compliance with the findings from the Olmsted decision, and more importantly, that Philadelphians living with disabilities have the same opportunities to live and be part of the community like everyone else. I'd like to recognize that Councilwoman Janie Blackwell has joined us. Are there any opening statements from our members? Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you. Good morning, all. This is a very important morning. I thank the chair for convening us, and all of you. There's so many important people who make such a difference in our city and beyond who are here. I will have to step out doing part of it, Mr. Chairman, and ask that I am able to leave my vote to go to a funeral for the mother of a staff member. So I will be out and be back in, but there could be no more important panel than you have here for people who are involved in this issue and people who deal with homelessness and people with special needs. You know, this is part of my issue, and I am just grateful that at this point in time and this early in the year, we get a chance to make this discussion in case we want to advocate for other needs before the budget. So again, let me thank you, the panel, and certainly all of you who've come here to testify on this very, very important issue.
You have always given a voice to the most vulnerable in our community. You have always, Councilwoman Blackwell, given a voice to the most vulnerable in our community. I thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also echo what Councilwoman Blackwell has said. First of all, congratulations on putting this great panel together and your hard work. I know it takes a lot of time and effort, of course, with your staff, and we have so many excellent witnesses here. And I'm saying that because I have to apologize. I mean no disrespect, but I too have got a busy schedule that I could not shift around today, so I will be coming in and out. I hope you'll understand that I am paying attention, and I do think this is important, but I will try not to be disruptive as I move in and out for my meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilman. I would now like to call up the first panel. Thomas Earl, who's the President and CEO of Liberty Resources. Laura Weinbaum, who is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives, Project Home. Roy Diamond, who's a parent, and he was to testify on affordable housing. He's an affordable housing developer and consultant. He's not able to be here, so Katie, would you please read Mr. Diamond's testimony into the record? Yes.
Good morning, Chairman O'Brien, Vice Chairman Heenan, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Roy Diamond. I am 62. I was born in Philadelphia and have been a lifelong resident. I have two jobs. First, I am the father of my son Jacob, who is 24. He lives at home here in Philadelphia. He was diagnosed at Children's Hospital with autism when he was 18 months old. He cannot speak. Growing up, despite the wonderful care he received at CHOP, he has intractable epilepsy and has frequent seizures. He is a great young man. However, since he turned 21 and was no longer entitled to go to school, his world has been very narrow. He watches videos, he takes walks in the Wissahickon Park, and walks along city streets. He likes the city, but he cannot be left alone and needs an aide 24/7. My wife Ella and I often have this conversation. These are the best times of Jacob's life. We are here to care about him, but we are getting old, and in just a few years, we will be unable to care for him any longer. There are no good places for him to live, no one who will care for him and seek to broaden his world, to help him be the best he can be and contribute to the city. In short, nowhere to live, no services to help him be safe, healthy, and fully alive in the same sense we all wish for ourselves and our children. My second job is that I develop and help others develop affordable, multifamily rental communities. As a legal services attorney, then a partner in Rouse & Associates, and then, since 1990, 25 years ago, the owner of a company based here in Philadelphia. In one manner or another, through all those roles, I have supported the development and operation of almost 7,000 affordable apartments. I am also the president of Autism Living and Working, a non-for-profit that has developed and operated 5 group homes for adults with autism, including one with the amazing help of Councilwoman Blackwell in West Philadelphia and one in the Northeast. In a few months, my company will help 2 not-for-profit organizations in Pittsburgh break ground for the construction of a $15 million, 42 new construction apartments, 21 of which will be reserved for adults with autism. Services will be provided by NHS, a national provider of services headquartered in Pennsylvania. It will be the first affordable community in Pennsylvania in which adults with autism will live together with typical adults. This building will be financed in the same manner as many projects in Philadelphia have once been built since the late 1980s, using funding from the county combined with private investment, which purchases an award of low-income housing tax credits from Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. This development will exist because the leadership of Allegheny County understands the needs of thousands of adults with autism like my son and the crisis that their adulthood creates for their families and the community as a whole. Those leaders made their priorities clear to the staff and to state officials charged with distributing these resources. So here's what we should do now. 1, when the Office of Housing and Community Development issues a request for proposals for soft funding, which, if awarded, enables a project to compete for tax credits at PHFA, OHCD, and the mayor should prefer those applications that set aside apartments for adults with autism and advocate for those projects at the state level. 2, families burdened by additional costs to care for their adults with autism should merit a credit when calculating city wage taxes. The public sector has simply shifted these costs to families, adding financial disaster to their lives. 3, the state and federally funded waiver programs are insufficient to provide supports that enable every Philadelphia adult with autism to have a chance at a decent life. The city's disability and health offices should include a person who focuses every day upon bringing more resources, private and public, to the city. This is an era of creative private and public partnerships. Let's enter the 21st century and make them happen here. 4, finally, 4,600 persons with autism in 2014 produced 25,000 families and friends. The number increased by the 116% in 5 years and can be expected to continue to increase. Statewide, the increase has been 181% during the same period. We don't want to be, but we are increasingly understanding how to help our families, and we will actively support those who help us.
Thank you, Katie. Now, I would like to recognize Mr. Earl. Would you please identify yourself for the record, and then you can begin your testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chairperson. My name's Thomas Earl. I'm the current president and CEO of Liberty Resources, which is the federally funded Center for Independent Living that serves all of Philadelphia County. I'm also the chairperson of the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, and in both capacities, the development and preservation of housing that is accessible and affordable to our seniors, working families, and people with disabilities, including low-income households, are issues that are very important to Liberty Resources, but also the Community Relations Division of the Commission on Human Relations. The vast majority of consumers that Liberty Resources serves are people mostly with physical disabilities, but we also serve several folks with cognitive disabilities, including autism and other developmental disabilities, most of whom are on low fixed monthly income, such as Social Security and Social Security disability income. Through our supports coordination or case management services, we serve over 3,200 consumers throughout the area. A wide range of disabilities, some young, some middle-aged, and some old. Many of our consumers have been with us so long that they started with services in the under 60 model, and now are in their late 50s and are approaching 60 and switching over to aging services available through the Department of Aging. For all of our consumers, the ability to live in the community independently in an integrated setting in safe, affordable, and accessible housing is paramount. One of the biggest obstacles to Liberty Resources' independent living mission is the ability to obtain affordable, accessible housing for the many consumers that we work with to move out of nursing home facilities and other institutional settings like Philadelphia Nursing Home that was mentioned earlier. For this reason, Liberty Resources, the disability rights organizations such as Disabled in Action and the Campaign to Take Back Vacant Land and the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities have advocated for the passage of important legislation such as the Housing Trust Fund, inclusionary zoning laws, and most recently, the Land Bank Ordinance. Additionally, the Housing Trust Fund requires that all housing development funded through the Housing Trust Fund must be visitable. While these legislative efforts, along with the limited resources of the Office of Housing and Community Development and the Philadelphia Housing Authority do help, as the fifth largest city of the United States, we have a very long way to still go to meet the housing needs of people with disabilities. Recent census figures show a substantial increase in the number of residents in Philadelphia who have a disability. And over the last 30 years, Liberty has worked to transition many people with disabilities out of expensive, isolating nursing homes to integrated cost-saving apartments. Currently, Liberty Resources has a waiting list of over 110 individuals who are living in a nursing home setting who have expressed a strong desire to move out into the community. The lack of accessible housing has escalated to such an unmanageable level that in 2007, Liberty Resources started its own community housing development organization, Liberty Housing Development Corporation, and with the city, OHCD, and PHA, have tried to meet the needs of our many consumers. Since its inception, our housing work has successfully developed and managed over 40 units of accessible housing that is integrated. Our most recent project consisted of a 13 accessible unit building built on a contaminated piece of vacant land that was successfully remediated at 55th and Vine. And for this, we thank Councilman Curtis Jones and his support and leadership on bringing this project to fruition. In 2015, with the support of Councilwoman Janie Blackwell, we are seeking to build 24 units of housing, 7 of which will be physically accessible and the balance visitable on an abandoned property at 52nd and Poplar Street with low-income tax credit funding from the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. We find it somewhat ironic that with the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act approaching in July of this year, and, as you mentioned, the 15th anniversary of the Olmsted decision, that we are still here in Pennsylvania having these discussions about the lack of affordable housing. The Olmsted decision is a landmark civil rights decision from our Supreme Court, and among other things, holds that people with disabilities really have a right under the community integration mandate of the ADA to live in the community. Living in the community requires community capacity, accessible public transportation, employment opportunities, affordable integrated housing, and we recommend in conclusion, Chairperson O'Brien, that we have two specific steps going forward. That with current regulations under HUD, that both OHCD and PHA assign the highest priority to increasing the availability of accessible, affordable, integrated housing through their respective funding sources and grants. We know recently with the President Obama administration that HUD has authorized an 811 Project Rental Assistance Voucher Program. Pennsylvania is receiving 200 of these vouchers. We hope that some of those vouchers will help organizations like Liberty Resources to meet the needs of the people that we hope will live in our housing project at 52nd and Poplar. The second step that we recommend today is that City Council promptly pass the legislative efforts that will be led by Councilman Kenyatta Johnson that will seek to increase the funding of the Housing Trust Fund. These are two things that could be done with relative ease that would provide some quick assistance over the coming year. We thank you very much for this hearing and your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. I would just state, for the purposes of this hearing, a little housekeeping measure. It's my intention to have all the panels testify and then afford the opportunity for council people to answer or to ask questions. The majority leader is here, so I'm going to go out of order and allow the majority leader to ask a question of you, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I have to go to a press conference across the hall, but I wanted to thank you.
Say nice things about me.
I am.
And
I'm
we'll
about
be
to.
excused.
I appreciate you holding these hearings because in the 4th Councilmanic District, we have a large number of assisted living facilities that have been a critical part of making life a little better for our constituents there. You are also going to hear from Mr. Kern, who also has the English House. But I want to thank you for the units that you put there and increasing my knowledge base on issues like visitability. And in our design of new housing, being able to have a situation where doors are wide enough, accessibility to bathrooms are such, and I've had an opportunity to see how it improves the quality of life of folk who steps become mountains, traffic signals become rivers where they have to run across and speed across, and to take that into account when we plan livable, walkable cities. So I want to thank you for bringing this up and encourage you. I'm going to pop in and pop back out to be a part of this. So thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Laura Weinbaum, do you want to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Laura Weinbaum, and I am the Vice President for Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives at Project Home, a housing and services provider striving to end and prevent homelessness in Philadelphia. Thank you for the opportunity to offer remarks here today on behalf of the Project Home community to address the need for housing for people with disabilities and the strategies that might meet that need. We have 3 basic recommendations for further consideration. First, we believe we can maximize our impact through transparency and continued collaboration among the city, including OHCD, OSH, DBH, and DHS, together with the PHA and providers. Second, we need to not only use existing resources better, but to explore models from other places to bring new resources to bear for people with special needs. Finally, we need to address the problems of behavioral health, including both mental illness and addiction, by pairing creative use of Medicaid with housing, healthcare, education, and employment. As you know, Philadelphia continues to struggle with the convergence of three issues. Excuse me. More than 1 out of every 4 residents lives in poverty, 1 in 4 live with disabilities, and there's only 1 affordable home available for every 3 extremely poor households. The need for affordable and permanent supportive housing for people living on extremely low incomes, like the 721 monthly SSI, is as great as ever. The PHA waiting list is estimated at 10 years. The Department of Behavioral Health can't even maintain a wait list for people who don't meet certain criteria because the demand is overwhelming. But at the same time, Philadelphia has made tremendous strides in providing housing to many of our most vulnerable citizens. We have the lowest per capita rate of street homelessness among major cities reporting their data in the point-in-time count to HUD, despite high poverty. As a city, we've prioritized providing permanent housing, the most effective tool for both addressing and preventing homelessness throughout our communities. Our work at Project Home and at providers across the city is focused on an overall strategy consistent with the federal plan to end homelessness, ending veterans and chronic homelessness by 2016, and homelessness among children, families, and youth by 2020. Strategies such as public-private collaboration, targeting resources, including coordinated assessment, and non-duplication of efforts are enabling us to serve more people. In 2012, Project Home, Bethesda Project, Horizon House, and Pathways to Housing formed a collaborative to permanently house roughly 1,000 of the most vulnerable persons living on our streets. Working with the city and other providers and PHA, at the end of the last fiscal year, 411 from this target group were permanently housed, and 200 more were staying indoors in non-permanent housing. This year, we'll apply these strategies to ending and preventing homelessness among young adults and people with a primary diagnosis of addiction, many of whom also struggle with underlying psychological or developmental disability. It's our hope that we'll be able to help meet these needs by creatively pairing Medicaid and health resources with rent subsidies and housing resources. But even creative use of existing resources is not enough. We need to explore additional models for state and city investment in housing. Both the research done in 2005 for the city's 10-year plan to end homelessness and a report done for us by Feather Houston, and that report is described below, provide examples of best practices from other places and insight into the multiple city, county, and state funding streams that go into these deals in other places across the country. There is an important distinction to make here. Not everyone with a disability needs permanent supportive housing. Only people whose vulnerabilities mean that they would welcome and benefit from additional supports. But for the group who is chronically street homeless and living with a special need, we have created a collaborative forecast of the number of new units, 754, that we believe is needed to address the needs of this group. To address this goal, in addition to our existing 621 units, Project Home is currently developing 94 units at 810 Arch Street and gearing up for 88 additional units at 2415 North Broad, with vacancies prioritized for people experiencing chronic homelessness. Our partners, too, are developing or master leasing additional new housing possibilities. Many of the units are for people in our target populations: veterans, people with serious mental illness, people who have experienced or are at risk of homelessness, homeless and at-risk young adults, people in recovery who are connected to employment, other vulnerable groups, and residents from the community at large. I would like to briefly address why we believe that investing in new, larger-scale, permanent, supportive, or mixed housing development makes sense. As indicated in research conducted for us by former Pennsylvania Welfare Secretary Feather Houston on the best practices in financing and management of permanent supportive housing, larger-scale projects maximize the use of tax credits, allow for better on-site staffing, and save development time. Houston's research indicated that the development of larger-scale projects is well-suited to dense urban environments. Further, the larger number of units made it financially feasible to support 24-hour staffing, which residents and neighbors alike agree promotes a better environment. This scale is also what allows a real and significant impact on local neighborhood and commercial zones. Similarly, research conducted for us by eConsult in 2007 and updated in 2011 indicates that properties within a quarter-mile radius of Project Home experienced a boost to their property values of approximately $24,000 more than comparable properties outside Project Home areas, resulting in $10.6 million in additional property taxes to the city and the school district. We believe this is in part due to the positive presence of Project Home facilities. We believe that our community engagement process plays a role in building the social fabric in the neighborhood, and we're confident that interactions with community members in the vicinity of permanent housing developments strengthens the foundation there. A similar study in New York, conducted by NYU over 18 years and including 100 programs, corroborated the finding that real estate near permanent supportive housing increases in value more rapidly than in surrounding areas. Looking ahead, we believe there are 3 areas for focus: continued work on the vulnerable street homeless population, homelessness among young adults, and people who are homeless by virtue of addiction. Expanding our street outreach services to Kensington has shown us how vast the problems of homelessness caused by addiction are in our city, and our work with the city's homeless death review team has shown that this is truly a matter of life or death. We believe that our best bet for addressing addiction is pairing creative use of Medicaid with resources for housing, healthcare, education, and employment. We appreciate your review and consideration of this vital issue, and we're happy to answer any questions at this time or in the future. We hope to help Philadelphia create neighborhood amenities that not only house the most vulnerable Philadelphians, but contribute to the quality of life for our whole community, because none of us are home until all of us are home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to recognize my good friend Estelle Richmond, who is with us today. And as I've talked to many people who are going to testify here today, she has tutored and educated and empowered many of us in policymaking roles. And she has always taught me, one of the things that she's taught me is that housing is the basis for which success for all other social services are built. And if you don't have the housing, then the rest of it does not follow. I want to thank you for your compelling and comprehensive testimony today. It is inspiring. The substantive nature of your testimony invites us all to build on the inclusive, transparent and collaborative models that you're articulating, and that we also have to look, as you pointed out, to increasing the dollars in the trust fund and other instruments that will build success. I just have a couple questions. One, following up on your testimony, and I'm going to do a little ADHD thing and go off on the side, because parenthetically, I will ask how individuals move off the waiting list. And over the years, I suspected that sometimes there wasn't even a waiting list, and if you requested it, then the individual that you were inquiring about might move up on the list. Unfortunately, there are many families who are here today who are supportive of their family members who need this supportive housing. And often, they get no peace throughout their life, because it's not until both parents have passed away that a permanent placement is available. And I put myself in those parents' positions that they don't know what it is. And even when they're gone, they can't be sure that it is ever supportive in the ways that enables them to enjoy a quality of life. Having said that, do you, Mr. Earl, want to comment on your knowledge of the prioritization of that list? Is it most in need? Is it the order of waiting, the right match? Would you shed some light on that?
Certainly. We know, for example, with the intellectual disability waiting list in Pennsylvania, which is around 13,000, 14,000 individuals, that there are tiers or levels of priority that are assisted to help with those individuals move up on the waiting list. And aging parents and other emergency circumstances are certainly factors in that process. For Liberty Resources, the waiting list that I mentioned, it's a pretty basic waiting list. It's approximately 110 individuals, several of whom currently live in Philadelphia nursing home or other nursing homes throughout Philadelphia County. So that priority, the fact of where they're currently living, they're living in an expensive and unnecessary institutional setting, a nursing home. and that makes them a priority for us and our team to move them out. We would like to see that level of priority also adopted by the Philadelphia Housing Authority, the Office of Housing and Community Development, and the Office of Supportive Housing, headed up by Danette Mintz, because we know that HUD allows entities, housing authorities, and other housing organizations to count a person who lives in a nursing home as being equal in priority to a person who's homeless. Because when you live in a nursing home or nursing facility, many of us would not consider that a permanent home, especially for younger adults with disabilities. So that is a priority that we give our highest attention to, and hope that as we move forward with these discussions that the various agencies in the city can also do that.
Thank you. I have a second follow-up question. There are issues with linking individuals who need accessible, affordable housing to units as they become available. This is improved, but I understand that only 70% of the affordable, accessible units developed in Philadelphia are being filled with people who need accessible housing. In another program called ACAP, we have what's called an interest list, and people can apply for the interest list, and as part of that process, they are evaluated as to issues that would include them or exclude them based on the criteria. And is the percentage, the 70%, and I'm not holding to that, it could be below that or above that, is there an issue of individuals who need accessible housing not being on a ready list to move in, so that they can move that percentage up towards 100%?
I would say that the population that we're talking about is underestimated. The 110 people that I referenced are people who we know firsthand who have expressed a desire to move out of a nursing facility. We know that the minimal data set that is required to be kept by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services requires nursing facilities to specifically ask individuals upon entry when they're admitted to a nursing home if they are interested in moving to a community-based setting. And we suspect that that number of folks who answer yes to that is much higher than the small subset that we're currently working with.
Okay. Laura, NIMBY, not in my backyard. I understand that you have research that has indicated properties within a quarter-mile radius of Project Home facilities experience a significant boost in their property values. Could you please talk about what Project Home has done to strengthen the fabric of these neighborhoods?
Yeah, sure. I think what we, Kevin Gillen, who did the research for us at eConsult, would chastise me if I didn't indicate that it's associated with a higher property value than the average increase within that exact zip code. But there's nothing that says that it's causation necessarily, right? So it's up to us to explain where we think that that actually comes from. What I would say is when we go into a neighborhood, the very first thing we do now, having learned our lesson in many ways the hard way over many, many years, is to go and meet with and talk to as many of the stakeholders in that community as we can. Individual homeowners, business people, the neighborhood groups, obviously the elected representatives and other folks who represent those communities, and start to hear a little bit of, what are the concerns, what do they feel are the needs of the community, how can we make this something that integrates well with whatever is planned or is already going on in the community. And I think, and sometimes those dialogues are not pretty. But I do think that they create an opportunity for people to get together in ways that they maybe haven't gotten together before, and to express some of their concerns in hopefully a fairly open and candid way, and for us to begin to think about how we can implement a model that works for those neighborhoods. And really that's why a couple of years ago we asked Feather Houston to do a little bit more research for us and think about how we could create and manage the best, not only place for vulnerable folks to live, but something that would be a really powerful neighborhood amenity.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you for having us.
I would like now to call up the second panel of housing developers, Kelvin Jeremiah, who's the President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority, Gavin Kerr, the President and CEO of Inglis House, and Mark Diker, who is the Director of Business Development, Mission First Housing. Dichter.
Teacher. How are you?
Mr. Jeremiah, would you please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Good morning, Chairman O'Brien, Councilman Ho, and members of the Committee on the Disabled and Special Needs. I am Kelvin Jeremiah, the President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority, the fourth largest housing authority in the United States, serving over 80,000 low-income Philadelphians. PHA owns and manages over 14,000 housing units throughout the city. We also administer the Section 8 voucher program, which serves an additional 17,000 low-income households. PHA is committed to providing affordable housing opportunities to the city's most vulnerable populations, including persons with disabilities. There are nearly 2,500 occupied units with reasonable accommodation features within PHA's assisted housing portfolio. The more than 100 wheelchair users on our waiting list are being prioritized for units. As you know, Mr. Chairman, Councilman O, there is an incredible and increasing demand for affordable housing in Philadelphia. With a low unit turnaround rate that averages just over 400 units per year, applicants can expect to be on the wait list for years, some as much as a decade. However, PHA maintains a separate wait list for wheelchair users and persons requesting reasonable accommodations, which tends to be shorter. Only wheelchair users can occupy PHA's wheelchair-accessible units. PHA is also committed to offering residents with disabilities reasonable accommodation, which includes making modification to units to meet the specific medical or disability needs of the resident. Examples of such modifications may include stair lifts, strobe lights, automatic doors, ramps, and elevators. Given the high demand for affordable housing, PHA has undertaken an incredibly ambitious development agenda to increase the number of affordable housing units in the city, including housing for persons with disabilities. As part of this effort, PHA currently has several new developments in the pipeline or under construction, including Oakdale and Gordon Streets in Strawberry Mansion, and Queens Row and Queen Lane in Germantown. When these developments are complete, PHA will have an additional 11 units that would meet the uniform federal accessibility standards and 504 requirements. Consistent with federal regulations, new PHA developments will contain at a minimum 5 to 10% fully accessible units to give persons with disability greater freedom to choose where they live and to enjoy their homes and the amenities PHA provides. We currently run about a 10% rate for the developments that I just mentioned. Additionally, PHA has been part of the Nursing Home Transition Initiative since 2006, receiving referrals from a number of service partners, some of whom are here today. Since the initiative's inception, PHA has successfully transitioned over 150 residents out of nursing homes back into communities and homes of their choice, which helps the state save money while also affording residents with long-term disabilities the opportunity to live independently. In order to increase the number of affordable housing units for persons with disabilities, PHA has also awarded project-based vouchers and operating subsidies to organizations and developers who share our mission, like Liberty Resources, 1260 Housing, and English House. To date, PHA has designated over 245 project-based vouchers for persons with disability, which we expect to increase in the near future based on funding availability. Our partners have also been instrumental in assisting their authority as we continue to outreach to persons with disabilities. Mr. Chairman, make no mistake about it. PHA cannot address the affordable housing crisis and the housing needs of persons with disabilities alone. That is why I believe that the partnerships we have established and continue to build upon are so crucial. Indeed, the issue of affordable, accessible housing requires coordination across agencies and disciplines. It does not stop at housing. Oftentimes, persons with disabilities require services, case management, and accommodations so they can live independently. We must work collaboratively with advocacy groups and community organizations to affirmatively further the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Fair Housing Initiative. It is not enough just to provide housing or identify impediments. We need to take affirmative steps to eradicate those barriers, increase housing opportunities, and to be more proactive in housing persons with disabilities. Certainly, one area of concern is the availability of safe, decent, and affordable accessible housing in the city. PHA knows from experience that it is particularly difficult for voucher holders to find wheelchair-accessible housing that meets their needs in the private market. That is why PHA gives private landlords an increased payment standard for accessible units up to 110% of the fair market rent if the unit's calculated rent comes in higher than the regular fair market rent. This allows PHA to pay a larger portion of the tenant's rent while ensuring that the unit remains affordable to the tenant, many of whom are on fixed incomes. Before we can offer the increased payment standard, the unit must be inspected by a 504 inspector and verify that it meets the qualifications of an accessible unit. The higher rent incentive is provided only if the tenant requires an accessible unit. We need more incentives to include accommodations and other features that persons with disabilities need. We would also benefit from regulations that include philanthropic requirement for developers to provide more affordable and accessible housing opportunities in the city. We need, Mr. Chairman, more incentives and more funding right here in the city for affordable housing, especially, as I said, for those who are disabled. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important topic, and I look forward to working with you to address this important issue. I'm happy to answer any questions the members might have.
Thank you, Mr. Jeremiah. Mr. Kerr, would you please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Hi, I'm Gavin Kerr. I'm the president and CEO of the English Foundation, and appreciate your having this hearing, and want to just reinforce what a lot of people have said, which is this is more than an Olmsted issue. This is a very human issue. English serves about 1,000 people who are significantly physically disabled and are wheelchair users. There are people who are just like you and me, but because of bad genes, bad luck, a bad accident, or a difficult birth, wind up facing challenges that we can only begin to imagine. Our commitment as an organization is to really enabling them to achieve their goals and live life to the fullest. A key part of that is to have a home of your own. English Housing has worked since 1976 to develop housing for people who are disabled and use wheelchairs. We currently offer 292 people home in 259 apartments throughout the region. We provide also competent housing management and supports to enable them to live effectively in the community, and with additional resources than most developers would provide to allow that to occur. Unfortunately, safe, accessible, and affordable housing is very difficult to find. Our housing organization has 192 people on our wait list. That translates into over 5 years of time for people to wait. So we can't just sit and wait for people to move into apartments that rarely turn over. We've invested about $9.1 million of English resources in developing 142 additional homes, of which 52 are set aside for people living with physical disabilities. In September, we opened Mission Green, which was a partnership with the Medical Mission Sisters and Roy Diamond's organization, to provide 62 absolutely gorgeous tax credit affordable 55 and older apartments in the Fox Chase, in Abington on the Fox Chase border. We thank you for your support in doing that. It's just an amazing place for people to live, of which 15 of the residents are young people who are physically disabled, who are wheelchair users. Last month, with the partnership with PHFA and PHA, we were able to break ground on our English Gardens at Belmont. It will be an 80-unit, fully integrated community of 40 units for people who need our Accessibility Plus apartments and are wheelchair users, and 40 people from the community who are low-income earners. We're deeply thankful to Councilman Curtis Jones and the encouragement of really all of council in helping get this project off the ground. Without the support of really the whole community, these projects never, ever come to life. We need, as we look to the future, to create even more homes to allow people to live independently. There are 5 key trends that have driven in this direction, many of which have been talked about already. 25 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which then was advanced further through the Olmsted Supreme Court case. The ability of our society to help people with traumatic injuries and significant disabilities to live longer and to live better is driving up the need for affordable, accessible homes. In the period between 2000 and 2010, the population of people with disabilities grew by 8% as a result of the capabilities of the healthcare system to allow that to occur. Fourth, support for wounded veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts has brought new resources and new innovations to being able to help people live at home. And then finally, policy and funding changes that are really encouraging integrated communities is transforming the way that we're developing our housing in many, many great ways, but unfortunately also means that you need far more capital. To build an apartment complex to serve 25 people with disabilities requires a community of 100. And so that requires a huge amount of capital that we can't do alone. So we know we need to be partners and find great partners to do that. To build a community for the people that we serve, we believe there are 5 absolutely critical criteria. First, the neighborhood has to be safe with fully accessible infrastructures, transportation, and welcoming communities. Our neighborhood in the English House community has been phenomenal in welcoming our people, but there are many other neighborhoods in the community that can meet those criteria. We need to have low-cost land acquisition because the resources to building homes the capital resources are limited. We need low-cost capital for property development, which comes primarily through tax credits and contributions of our donors. Rental vouchers to assist with the subsidy of rents. Our average tenant pays about $150 per month for an average rent of about $1,000. And then finally, disability competent supportive services and housing management that really understands the special needs of this community and can really encourage them in maintaining their independence. We're currently partnering with Conifer Development to redevelop the convent at Nazareth Hospital in Northeast Philadelphia. That property will have 12 units that are set aside with our Accessibility Plus criteria out of 44 total units. We found that in order to develop housing, even with the tax credits and other funding resources, it requires an additional investment of English capital in developing those properties. We're blessed that the people who came before us created an endowment and that we have many donors who support our work. But we can't continue to invest $9 million in 62 units for people with disabilities. So we've got to find new capital sources and new vehicles. We're currently working with Pennsylvania with the Commonwealth as well as with others in the development community to look at social impact bonds as one additional resource for developing creative pay-for-performance capital sources so that we can expand our development activities. Finally, housing is the most important, most fundamental, but only one criteria for living successfully in the community. As we look to move people from nursing homes like the Philadelphia Nursing Home into the community, first they need a home, but then they need a support system. And to live independently in the community, you need to get access to integrated, affordable, accessible care that's disability competent so that your health care needs are met and that you're kept well and out of the hospital and out of nursing homes. Secondly, you need to have dependable, consistent, consumer-driven attendant care services, which are difficult and far and few between. The resources for those benefits are very limited by the state, and the people who are doing them are paid relatively low amounts of income and need to be able to provide the best, most safest care in the most private and vulnerable situations. Third, you need to be able to be engaged in the community. Living in a house by yourself, but not being a part of the community is a disability in its own right. And we think that technology is another resource that can really drive that, both in terms of environmental controls, adaptive computing, and other ways to connect people into the broader world, even if they can't get there in their wheelchair. So we are very, very appreciative of the opportunity to be here and to share our absolute commitment to the people we serve and that many of you all in this room serve, and to do everything we can to help the city and the state to develop more housing to meet those needs. We see ourselves as a partner. We're not a sole developer. And so whatever we can bring to the table, just call us.
Thank you so much. Mr. Decker, did I say that?
Teacher.
Thank you. Could you then please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Good morning, Chairman O'Brien, Councilman O, and members of the Disabled and Special Needs Committee. My name is Mark Teacher, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Mission First Housing Group, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to develop and manage affordable, safe, and sustainable homes for people in need, with a focus on the vulnerable. We ensure our residents have access to resources to help them live independently. We deliver housing that provides long-term benefits to residents and neighborhoods alike. Mission First Housing Group was founded in Philadelphia in 1988 as a joint venture between the City of Philadelphia, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Known at the time as 1260 Housing Development Corporation, our original mission was to meet the housing needs of adults living with serious mental illness. This population was slipping through the cracks, and the need was large and complex enough that required a comprehensive, coordinated response. Mission First's story begins with our first resident, Mary, a woman who came to us after living in this shelter system and then unsuccessfully moving from one affordable apartment to another. In 1989, Mary moved into a Mission First property, a South Philadelphia duplex, where she lived as one of our residents for the next 22 years. In our first year of operation, Mission First provided housing for 32 consumers of the behavioral health system. Today in Philadelphia, more than 1,100 of our 1,900 residents are adults living with serious mental illness. Here are some of the factors that contributed to our ability to successfully house this vulnerable population. From the beginning, Mission First approached the issue as an affordable housing problem. It just happened that the population we were serving was one that was living with serious mental illness. Our goal was to find safe, affordable housing for these individuals throughout the city. It was critical that they not be warehoused in the city's poorest and most under-resourced neighborhoods. Today, you will find our residents living in neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia, including University City, in Center City just off of Broad Street, near Rittenhouse Square, and Northeast Philadelphia. Leveraging Mission First's startup funding was critical. Rather than being limited by the number of units we could purchase with our startup funding, Mission First used this initial investment to leverage additional dollars, more than $191 million on behalf of behavioral health consumers in Philadelphia. This includes $112 million for development, almost $23 million in services, and nearly $56 million in rental subsidies. The low-income housing tax credit was a key tool that we used to finance development. Our sources also have included Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program funds, HUD funding, including Supportive Housing Program, Shelter Plus Care, Section 811 program, and Energy Innovation funds, and Philadelphia Housing Authority project-based vouchers, among others. We take a flexible approach to development and management so that we can prioritize the needs of our residents. For example, in addition to new construction or acquiring and rehabilitating properties, Mission First also master leases units, a process wherein we rent units from landlords in the community, then sublease them to our residents while serving as the management agent for these properties. This model gives us the flexibility to quickly provide housing to individuals in need in the communities where they want to live. Today, we provide housing for adults living with serious mental illness in 721 units that Mission First owns and 420 additional units that we master lease in the city. And as everyone has said before, collaboration is essential, and Mission First has a great partner in the city's Department of Behavioral Health. In our early years, we worked very closely with Estelle Richmond, whose leadership led Philadelphia to become an early innovator in the provision of supportive housing for individuals living with mental illness. The city's decision to separate housing and services allowed organizations like Mission First to focus on what we did best, develop and manage housing, while partnering with other organizations that had the service expertise. We have also drawn upon our successes at providing housing for a particularly vulnerable population to serve others in need, including veterans, survivors of domestic violence, seniors, and families. Today, across our Mid-Atlantic footprint, Mission First provides safe, affordable, sustainable homes to almost 4,000 people in nearly 3,100 units. At the same time, we maintain our commitment to the individuals we were founded to serve, and we work diligently with Philadelphia's Department of Behavioral Health to provide permanent supportive housing for more than 1,100 individuals. We will continue to develop and refine our model to meet the needs of those we serve in an ever-changing political and financial environment. This includes advocating for the critical resources that fund our work. When we developed our first tax credit property in Philadelphia in 1997, there was not as much competition for affordable housing dollars. Today, as I'm sure PHA will testify, the 9% low-income housing tax credit, a subsidy that covers 70 to 90% of development costs, is an extremely competitive funding source, and relying on these dollars means that important projects take much longer to fund. Alternative resources like the 4% tax credit could play a much greater role in helping to fund affordable housing in Philadelphia. Yet the 4% credit covers only about a third of the development cost of a typical affordable housing project. In order to bring this and other important resources to spur the development of affordable housing, the City of Philadelphia will need to think differently about how to help fund these important projects. This is especially important as we know that permanent supportive housing is a cost-effective intervention for supporting the most vulnerable in our community. Moreover, it's an intervention that promotes increased quality of life for those in need. We hope the Mission First can be an ongoing resource to the city as it tackles this important issue. Councilman O'Brien, thank you for inviting Mission First to provide this testimony today and for the work you're doing on behalf of individuals and families with special needs. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about Mission First's statement.
Thank you, Mr. Dietrich. Kelvin, thank you for testifying today and your efforts at PHA to serve Philadelphians in need of affordable, accessible housing. It's clear that you have a difficult task, given the demand far outweighs the supply. You mentioned that PHA maintains a waiting list for wheelchair users. Do you have data on the number of individuals with disabilities on your waiting list and what disabilities these individuals have?
Yes, Councilman O'Brien. There are just over 100 people on the wait list for waiting for wheelchair accessible units. All told, there is 177 people who have requested reasonable accommodation in one form or another, and that ranged the gamut. It could be for grab bars, for ramps, for elevator lifts, etc.
Thank you. What do you think an ideal PHA partnership to house people homeless and not with disabilities would look like? And are there models out there that you think Philadelphia should be utilizing?
Great question. First, I think the City Council has taken a good first step late last year when the Council President announced the city's affordable housing initiative that is to bring some 2,000 or so homes, affordable homes to the city. And a commitment that would require a commitment on the part of the city of actual dollars. Unlike most cities, we haven't yet seen the kind of investment by the municipality, by the city, in affordable housing. As you know, 93% of our budget comes from the federal government. It would be nice if the city or to contribute some portion of dollars to expand and increase affordable housing opportunities more broadly for Philadelphians. You know as well as I do that we are one of the poorest cities in the country. We have at PHA over 100,000 families currently waiting on our combined waiting list for housing, for affordable housing. Mr. Chairman, it takes those families, it could take those families up to 10 years because we only have 432 units that becomes available annually. We will never be able to meet that demand. And so despite our best efforts, I think one of the things that we're doing is partnering with folks like Mission First and the English Housing to provide housing for what we're calling special populations because of the incredible need that they have, the incredible demand for housing that exists. And I think the city, and frankly the state, should play a more active role in funding those types of programs.
Those numbers are staggering. We've heard terms like Federal Section 504, ADA, FHA. Is PHA in compliance with the requirements for accessible housing for individuals with disabilities?
Yes, I would like to think so.
Okay, there might be some
So that's a trick
people that
question.
view that differently.
Yeah, I believe that we are in fact in compliance. We have a number of families who have made requests for reasonable accommodation that we are working with. But as you can imagine, while we have identified the need, identifying the housing is next. And without available vacant unit to house families, we find that sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we would like to house families with disabilities.
Thank you, Kelvin. Gavin, it's wonderful to see English, which has historically served as a nursing facility, diversify its programs to include expanded community-based housing options for individuals with disabilities. All the housing developments you've discussed have included mixed-use, units for people with and without disabilities. Will this be your approach as you undertake new development projects for individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think English Community Life could serve as a model for other disability populations?
We do. I think our goal with our housing is to create the opportunity for people to live in the community, and then with English Community Life to create the integrated delivery system to support them in the community, and is very adaptable to all sorts of disabilities. We just happen to be competent in working with people with significant physical disabilities and are happy to share everything we're doing in the pilots with other people throughout the area.
We'd love to explore those opportunities, and I'm very impressed with what you're doing with the Medical Mission Sisters, and I'm looking forward to the Nazareth Convent development as it moves forward. Mark, I think Mission First Housing serves as a model in several ways. Your ability to successfully leverage private dollars, develop strategic partnerships, and ensure individuals with disabilities are not isolated in the poorest pockets of Philadelphia. Given we're clearly under-resourced to meet the needs of Philadelphians living with disabilities, do you have any thoughts as to how we may once again leverage private dollars similar to how you did with Robert Wood Johnson funding?
Sure. I think it's a great question. I think that one of the things that Kelvin brought up is, I think that in general, I think if the city speaks with a collective voice in terms of funding and in terms of capital, operating resources, I think we have a much greater case to leverage other dollars in terms of philanthropic dollars and the like. The one thing that is very clear to me, though, is in just talking to people in the philanthropic community, housing is not generally a hot topic in the foundation world today. I think that the special needs housing could be, and I think that angle could be a way to go after other dollars. And I think that putting together a few pieces I've heard today, having priorities in funding rounds for different disabilities, in terms of, and then maybe bringing private resources to the table, I think would encourage developers, to work to trying to solve this problem. But it's a three-legged stool. It's development, it's operating dollars, and it's services, and you really need all three. And there's just not enough affordable housing in this city right now.
I was fixated on Kelvin's statement on philanthropic incentives, and perhaps we could put a work group together around the criteria that you have testified here today, and perhaps how we can build a better collaborative. And I would like Katie to reach out to you so that we can move this conversation informally forward. So thank you for your testimony. Councilman O, do you have any questions?
I do. Thank you very much. So I had a meeting at Drexel University about a month ago with officials from Seoul, the city of Seoul, and they were there meeting with IBM around smart aging, smart cities, smart housing. And so they are proceeding forward with smart housing, smart aging, which is pretty much, I think, a high-tech model of independent living. So people are shaking their heads, so they know what I'm talking about. And, so the city of Seoul has a $200 million investment fund on that project alone. So you could imagine our city with its paltry $3 million to a tech startup versus a city with $200 million in that singular project. Now, I've been to Sangdo City in Incheon, which is a $52 billion, development of a high-tech, green, top-of-the-line, everything. And so when they're building the houses, they're integrating into that, the construction of the building, all the technology, all the sensors that turns off the, for people with Alzheimer's, it'll turn off the heat if someone left the pot boiling and all that. So all the technology is built into adjusted temperatures, whatnot. And as far as I know, it also includes the solar and all the things to put the energy back on the grid, composting, things like that. So a portion of how the funding of that is being done, it appears, is that a portion of the expense of the high-tech building of these things and the sensors and all is offset by the technology that is brought into it, because I guess it's much like my phone. I get it for a cheap cost or free, but I got to pay for the service depending on how much I use. And that, the thing that we lack in Philadelphia, by the way, is we don't have an overseas investment fund for folks that are comfortable with this type of investment. We are trying to develop that currently with a International Trade and Investment Authority or Commission. That is going to probably be a charter change issue that we bring forward for the purposes of trying to get this money in that will more readily than here locally fund housing, which is not really identified as housing for independent living, persons with disabilities, but is just housing, smart housing. And I wonder your thoughts on that, as you're probably just a lot more familiar with this whole thing than I am, is what is the future trend and what is the possibilities here in Philadelphia to actually see a model project of some sort to move forward?
So we're very committed to leveraging technology to allow people to live independently and more cost effectively. There are sort of four key technologies. First is mobility technologies, which are incredible in terms of opening people's lives for them. The second is home environmental controls, and using a variety of door openers, window openers, a variety of things like you can get in your own home now. And some of that there is funding for some of that on an individual basis. The third is internet and other communication technologies that allow people to engage in the world, which are really, really important, as well as the fourth, opportunities for telehealth and other health monitoring technologies. We're partnering with Comcast currently to develop a lab within our adaptive computing center to really test those home technologies with people who have various needs. So much of their technology is currently built around voice response technology. And so we're trying to figure out how do we leverage that technology to then control all the home modifications and the internet capabilities. The other piece of it is, as we build Belmont, we're building Belmont to be completely wired, so whatever your particular needs are, you have the feed into your apartment so that you can then tap into the internet capabilities, whether it's for the Internet of Things or the human internet. We're also building that as a solar building so that we're subsidizing substituting solar power in order to fund and support some of those activities. The big challenge is, first, there's no capital resources for doing that or reimbursement for any of that. So we're in the process of fundraising to try to enable that. We do have a generous grant from the Hess Foundation that's helping us with that. Secondly, the operating costs, because they're independent living apartments, are covered by the individual living in that apartment. Most of the people that we serve are receiving Social Security income because they have to, and people who become physically disabled, their income drops by 79% within 10 years of their disabling event. So when it comes to paying the Comcast bill, that becomes a huge barrier because at $19.95 per month, when you're living on $800 per month, it's a big undertaking. So part of it is figuring out what vehicles can we get to subsidize some of those access fees for internet, whether it's Verizon or Comcast or some other vehicle, so that people with disabilities can take advantage of those technologies.
So I understood from my discussions with them and with some folks in Singapore and some other places around smart cities that with the use of sensors and with the medical data and all that information, they can pretty much follow, for example, the eating habits, the sleeping habits, the breathing, and they're saying like you're at risk of having a heart attack. You're at risk of having a medical emergency, and they do earlier intervention, such that what they're really saying is we're saving money. All of this smart aging, smart technology, smart health is that the information is fed back, whereby it is actually reducing the overall cost of medical services and other things. They have some pretty elaborate information to deal with. Do we have anything like
real.
that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely real, but it's still relatively untested. But part of the model we're trying to develop with the Community Life Program is to enable those kinds of technologies to be used. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Wounds are a huge issue for people who use wheelchairs. Being able to take a photo with a smartphone and send it automatically to your caregiver can allow early intervention that can avoid hospitalization and horrible trauma for an individual. So it doesn't have to be extraordinarily high-tech, but it just needs to be smart application. The other part of the conversation, though, is also independence and privacy. And so if I'm a 43-year-old person with MS, I may not want to have the kinds of technologies that they're talking about in Korea monitoring me to that extent and still maintain my independence as an adult.
Yes, that is one of the issues that arise as a cultural issue. And they have gotten past that in Singapore and in Korea, and maybe not here in
Very
the
different
U.S.,
cultures.
right? But pretty much like the HIPAA laws and other things. But anyway, thank you very much. I'm quite interested to see where we are. But if there was some legislation that the city could do. There was some talk about tax credits or incentives, but ultimately it just seems like a much bigger governmental policy issue, state and federal government. But certainly what the city could do, our financial state is not a big secret. It's a big problem in the city, but bringing in new dollars to direct towards investment in technology around housing or new types of housing might be something that is promising in the future.
I'd love to have a chance to sit and talk that through with you and explore ways that we can do that. I think there are sources of technology and resources to support it, but we just have to work together. And I think the city is a huge voice, even though you don't have a lot of resources. Having you be a voice in advocating for that really gives credibility when you're talking to investors.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to invite panel 3, Deborah McCullough, the Director of the Office of Housing and Community Development, Holly Glosser, Director of Development, Pennsylvania Housing and Finance Agency, and Jane Vincent, Mid-Atlantic Regional Administrator, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, come forward. Ms. McCullough, you can state your name for the record and begin your testimony when you're ready.
Good morning, Councilman O'Brien and members of the Disabled and Special Needs Committee and members of Council. If there are any still here. I am Deborah McCullough, the Director of Housing, and I'm here today to present testimony on behalf of the Office of Housing and Community Development. OHCD is the city's housing policy agency and is responsible for funding housing and community development programs that benefit low and moderate income residents and revitalize cities' neighborhoods. OHCD administers the city's housing budget, which is funded primarily from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, of approximately $61 million, with additional resources from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, approximately $3 million, the Housing Trust Fund that was mentioned earlier today. This year that's about $13 million, and the city's general fund about $3 million. The funds that OHCD receives expand Philadelphia's ability to have stable, quality, affordable, and accessible housing. OHCD has a long-standing commitment to support housing and housing services for Philadelphians with disabilities or special needs. OHCD's development policies reflect this over 20-year commitment. Each and every new construction development, either rental or homeownership, that OHCD funds is required to make 10% of the units accessible to people with physical disabilities and 4% of the units accessible to those with hearing and vision needs. This requirement also applies to developers that receive the low-income housing tax credits from the Commonwealth. Each of the developments that OHCD funds must market the accessible units to people with disabilities for 30 days via the News on Tap website prior to marketing to the general public. OHCD requires all new construction developments to include visitability design features to the extent they are feasible. Visitability features include at least one no-step entrance, all doors at least 32 inches wide, and hallways and other room entrances at least 36 inches wide. These features enable people with physical disabilities to visit friends and family who live in these homes. In addition to these policies, I would also like to highlight some of OHCD's key programs and partnerships and developments that specifically address the housing needs of the disabled and special needs citizens. OHCD funds the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation's Adaptive Modifications Program, known as AMP. This year, the funding amount is $1.65 million, funded primarily with Housing Trust Fund earnings. AMP is designed to help individuals with permanent physical disabilities live more independently in their homes. It provides adaptations to a home or an apartment, allowing easier access to and mobility within the home. A homeowner or renter can receive kitchen and bathroom modifications, stairways, elevators, barrier-free showers, widened doorways, and other services. Since 2007, AMP has provided increased accessibility and more mobility for more than 1,900 Philadelphia households. Philadelphia is fortunate to have many dedicated organizations that develop housing for people with disabilities and special needs. OHCD has supported Liberty Resources to develop accessible housing across the city, including in the Northeast, West Philadelphia, and Center City. OHCD has worked with autism living and working to produce quality, safe, and affordable units for those living with autism. OHCD has worked with Mission First, as Mark testified, to develop supportive independent living units throughout the city. Since 2007, OHCD has supported more than 2,500 units of housing for those with special needs, and of that, more than 500 units addressed mobility needs, and 106 units were accessible for those with hearing and vision impairments. The need to produce quality, affordable, and accessible housing is great, but it far outstrips the resources available. For example, the Adaptive Modifications Program has a waiting list of over 500 applicants. Since 2007, OHCD's federal and state funding has been reduced by 30%, or nearly $35 million annually. Because of this reduction in funding, the ability to produce more housing and expand programs that address the needs of the disabled and special needs residents is severely limited. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Holly, would you like to state your name for the record and begin your testimony when you're ready?
Absolutely. Good morning, Chairman O'Brien and members of the Committee on Disabled and Special Needs. And thank you for the invitation as well to meet with you this morning and provide a brief overview of Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency's programs and initiatives. I'm Holly Glauser, Director of Development of PHFA. In my remarks today, I'll be highlighting PHFA's programs that focus on rental housing opportunities for persons with disabilities and special needs through the federal low-income housing tax credit program, and I believe it was mentioned numerous times already this morning, as well as other agency financing products and special initiatives. As background, I want to provide a bit of context for these comments. The Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency works to provide affordable homeownership and rental housing options for older adults, low and moderate income families, and people with special needs. PHFA helps promote community and economic development across the state, and since its creation in 1972, has generated nearly $12 billion of funding for more than 157,000 single-family mortgage loans, helped fund the construction of 123,000 rental units, and saved homes for more than 48,000 families from foreclosure. Today, the primary vehicle for funding affordable rental housing for low-income individuals and families in the country and the Commonwealth is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Part of the success of the program is its ability to leverage other federal, state, and local resources, again mentioned a number of times this morning, for the new construction and preservation of vital housing stock for low-income individuals and families, with obviously a number of them targeting formerly homeless or persons with special needs. Since program inception, over 85,000 units in Pennsylvania have been developed, with over 29,000 of them in Philadelphia. So look at those numbers, 29,000 over 85,000 in Philadelphia. Tax credits are awarded each year on a competitive basis. This pool of funds is also known as the 9% tax credit program, following a statewide allocation plan which sets forth priorities and preferences for funding. Each year, we receive over 3 applications for each one we can award. Obviously, a very competitive program. A number of years ago, we identified one of the challenges in meeting the needs of persons with disabilities was access to affordability of quality housing stock. In 2005, and actually at the behest of then Secretary Estelle Richmond, the agency encouraged tax credit developers to increase the number of accessible units and properties to those individuals at or below 20% of area median income, extremely low-income individuals. As a result, over 700 accessible units have been built or are under development in 96 properties throughout Philadelphia. Building on this initiative and to further meet the housing needs of this vulnerable population, a permanent supportive housing preference was created in 2008, whereby tax credits are awarded to properties which set aside a number of units that facilitate the case management needs of residents through referrals with local service providers. Through this preference, tax credits have been awarded to 7 projects in Philadelphia, resulting in the creation of 93 dedicated units for permanent supportive housing, and we are currently working with the City of Philadelphia on coordinated referrals to these properties. In addition to the 9% tax credit program, there has been an increase in the number of developments built or preserved using tax-exempt bond financing, financed through the agency or the local issuing authority. Tax-exempt financing is often directly placed with investors and lenders to finance projects and receive an allocation of private activity volume cap as long as 50% of the cost of the properties are funded through tax-exempt bonds. These properties receive what's known as 4% tax credits, and I believe that was mentioned earlier. And they do not have to complete for the very competitive 9% tax credit program. This is making tax-exempt financing a very popular tool. Approximately 3,000 units a year are financed in this manner. PHFA has been encouraging these financing as a means for additional funding resources and looks favorably on those developers who are able to leverage both the 9% and 4% for their financing. And both Inglis and Mission First have been able to do this in recent years, and we're very supportive of their efforts to do so. To further support housing opportunities in tax credit units for persons with disabilities, PHFA applied for and was awarded $5.7 million of what's known as Section 811 Project-Based Rental Assistance Demonstration, a mouthful, from HUD. Through this program, PHFA will provide rental assistance for approximately 200 units statewide. This initiative is a cooperative effort with Pennsylvania's Department of Human Services, formerly DPW, and will build on existing partnerships to coordinate referrals to available tax credit units and provide the desperately needed housing subsidy to enable individuals to live independently in a community setting. We are thankful to the Philadelphia Housing Authority for their commitment of 50 Housing Choice vouchers we used in order to leverage and secure the HUD award. In January 2015, just a few weeks ago, the agency issued a notice of initial funding availability, setting aside 50 of our initial 200 units to a limited number of counties throughout the state that have the capacity to place residents quickly. We anticipate significant program activity in Philadelphia with those 200 units and are pleased to announce that the City of Philadelphia was one of the initial counties in our initial offering. We, again, anticipate a very strong rollout of this program in the next couple weeks. The Section 811 demonstration program funds will enhance established housing partnerships between PHFA and the City of Philadelphia. Since 2007, we have been working together through the Department of Behavioral Health and the Commonwealth's Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services to provide rental subsidies to eligible consumers. Through this effort, approximately 76 individuals are able to live in tax credit and private market units in Philadelphia, supported by all of the agencies. Additionally, through this great groundwork done so far by this group, another goal we hope to achieve is to fill the accessible units being developed in Philadelphia through the tax credit program by an individual needing the unit features. Additionally, developments participating in the agency's affordable housing programs must provide supportive services to enhance the quality of life for all residents and improve the financial viability of the housing development. PHFA has dedicated staff in its Housing Services Department that provides technical assistance on program design and facilitates strong information sharing networks between developers, owners, management agents to ensure the appropriate level of services for the residents. PHFA staff regularly participate in many disability-related boards and work groups throughout the Commonwealth and on a local level to remain informed on opportunities and current issues. In 2005, PHFA supported the creation and implementation of a web-based housing search tool. It's known as pahousingsearch.com, in partnership with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Community and Economic Development and DHS. Currently, there are 100,000 units listed on this site, with 2,500 available at any given time for rent. More than 500,000 searches have been completed through this tool in the past 12 months. pahousingsearch.com has played a significant role in assisting referrals to quickly move people into permanent housing. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to appear before you this morning and discuss the initiatives of PHFA. And we believe that through these strong partnerships, it is a means to ensure success in linking quality, affordable housing opportunities for persons with disabilities and special needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jane, would you like to identify yourself and proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Chairman O'Brien, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Jane Vincent. I am the Regional Administrator for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, our Mid-Atlantic region, which covers Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Delaware. In my role as Regional Administrator, I try to work closely with local, state, and federal partners to create strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities and to provide quality, affordable homes for all. HUD celebrates a very special anniversary this year. It's the creation of our agency and of 50 years of making a difference in people's lives.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. You'll be hearing more about it as the year continues. And Secretary Julian Castro is focused on one key priority, that's creating opportunity for all Americans by increasing access to affordable housing. For generations, individuals with disabilities have been denied access to places and opportunities that the rest of society takes for granted. Schools, markets, theaters, courts, the workplace, and of course, housing. Routinely placed in institutional and other segregated settings, many have been denied the right to participate in and fully benefit from all our society has to offer. Thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Supreme Court's Olmstead decision, we have reaffirmed principles of fairness and inclusion essential to our society, that individuals with disabilities have the right to live in healthy, integrated communities of opportunity and choice, like all Americans. Integrated communities enable individuals with disabilities to live independently, work, and receive services in the greater community, just like individuals without disabilities. Integrated communities allow individuals with disabilities to choose how they spend their time and who they spend their time with, as well as the opportunity to participate in all aspects of community life. Most importantly, they are places where individuals with disabilities live and interact with individuals without disabilities to the fullest extent possible. As more states facilitate the transition of individuals with disabilities from institutional or other segregated settings, like group homes and transitional housing for individuals who experience homelessness, into their communities, the need for meaningful choice among housing is critical. HUD may provide the funding and framework, but it is up to the states, units of local government, public housing agencies, and developers to implement and operate these much-needed opportunities. So I'd like to discuss federal funding options with you, and you've already heard about many of them from my counterparts at PHFA and the City of Philadelphia and others about how they use federal funding to make this work. In June 2013, HUD issued guidance to public housing agencies and other HUD assistance housing providers on how they can best support state and local Olmstead efforts. The guidance affirmed HUD's commitment that individuals with disabilities, like all persons, should have meaningful choice and self-determination in housing and in the health care and related support services they receive. This included an exploration of how our agency could do more to fund additional integrated housing units scattered throughout communities and provide a greater range of meaningful housing choices for individuals with disabilities. We continue to explore how existing HUD-assisted housing can provide individuals with disabilities increased opportunities to exercise autonomy, independence, and self-determination in living arrangements that have the comforts and quality of home. Today, there are 2 HUD Section 811 programs that support housing for individuals with disabilities. The first is the long-established Supportive Housing for Persons with Disabilities program, and the second, the 811 Project Rental Assistance Demonstration. The 811 Supportive Housing Program provides funding for nonprofit organizations to develop permanent, affordable, integrated housing options for extremely low-income individuals with disabilities who earn less than 30% of the area median income. The 811 Project Rental Assistance Demonstration Program awards rental assistance funds to state housing agencies like PHFA, which was just mentioned, that have formed partnership with state Medicaid and Health and Human Services agencies that develop methods for identifying, referring, and conducting outreach to extremely low-income individuals while offering the availability of services and support. The assistance to the state housing agencies can be applied to new or existing multifamily housing complexes funded through different sources like low-income housing tax credits and other programs. But 811 is not the only HUD program that supports affordable housing for individuals living with disabilities. HUD's Section 202 program provides new operating assistance to units set aside for low-income elderly persons with impairments, and these are the seniors who are most likely to end up in institutional care. More than 750,000 elderly persons, including nearly 200,000 living with disabilities, live in units supported by the project-based rental assistance vouchers that are awarded to public housing authorities for affordable housing rentals. Nearly 125,000 units of permanent supportive housing for individuals with disabilities experiencing homelessness are supported by HUD grants. We've also provided guidance, and you heard this mentioned earlier, on how community development block grants, CDBG, home and housing opportunities for people with AIDS, known as HOPWA, can be used to help provide affordable housing to individuals with disabilities. For fiscal year 2016, HUD has continued to demonstrate our commitment to housing with individuals with disabilities by proposing $150 million for project rental assistance contract renewals that will fully fund the current 1,800 properties and more than 21,000 units. The budget proposal also adds an additional $35 million for new Section 811 project rental assistance awards that would support about 700 new units. And as has been stated, much of this good work has been, at HUD, has been championed by our own Estelle Richmond, and it is really a pleasure that she has continued her role both federally and locally. And with that, I really want to thank you for the opportunity to address you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Deborah, I recognize there is a great deal of work to do to meet the housing needs of those with disabilities in Philadelphia. We're a leader in this area, and I'm sure that is in part due to the collaborative nature of the city departments like OHCD, OSH, DBH, and CBH. So thank you for the important work that you do. In your testimony, you noted OHCD funds development where 10% of the units must be accessible to people with physical disabilities and 4% of the units accessible to those with sensory disabilities. Of the recent funding awards, OHCD, can you tell us how many funding awards went to providers that were focused on housing needs for individuals with disabilities and what the allocations were by disability groups, intellectual, developmental, psychiatric, physical, or sensory? Or could you get that information?
I could give you that information. I don't want to just speak off the top of my head, but I can provide that for you, yes.
Okay, and you mentioned that OHCD funds must market the accessibility units to people with disabilities for 30 days. Do you think this is enough time, given that we know there are issues with linking folks or individuals in need to accessible housing? And how do you think we can improve this so that the affordable, accessible units are matched to those waiting in institutions?
I think the biggest problem we have is in that case, is the affordability issue, that in some cases, even the units that we're providing using low-income housing tax credits, for example, the affordability is still, the cost of the unit is still greater than the lowest income people can afford. And so sometimes the match is not, the difficulty is not the accessibility part of it, it's the affordability part of it. So the real challenge is to have a unit that is affordable to the very lowest income family or individual, and also has the accessibility needs that that family or that individual need. So perhaps marketing could be helpful, but in general, the problem is the affordability piece, not the accessibility piece.
Thank you for that clarification. What does the city see as the role of the Office of Supportive Housing in addressing this issue? And what about DBH and CBH?
The Office of Supportive Housing is the office, and it was earlier stated that Danette Mintz is the head of that. Danette has retired, God bless her, and the director of that is now Marina Hickian. And OSH supports provides the shelters, runs the shelters and has other programs. So we coordinate with OSH, but it's a separate department. It is funded primarily with general fund. We're funded primarily with federal funds. So we coordinate, but it's two different departments with two different primary goals.
Perhaps we could have a follow-up conversation with your new director. That would be helpful, and Katie can contact you. Another issue that I'm very interested in, are there any individuals with disabilities involved with the selection process for the awarding of OHCD funding awards?
For specific developments or in general, let me take a step back. In general, we have a variety of ways to receive input from citizens that include people with disabilities and anyone that wants to testify and give us input. We have a needs hearing every year in December, and then we have a hearing on the preliminary plan when that's issued, and then City Council has its hearing on the proposed plan that's later in the spring. So at each of those occasions, there's opportunity for people to give us input on our proposed budget and plan for the year. On specific developments, there's a set of recommendations that is made up of city and redevelopment authority, and this year we coordinated also with PHA, representatives of the Planning Commission, representatives of OHCD. So there's a variety of people that sit and review very specific proposals, if that's what you mean. So that doesn't have citizen input, that's an internal process.
No, but what I'm saying is, when I go to a meeting, I'm often very much aware of who's in the room, but I'm also very much aware of who's not in the room. So when you're mentioning all these agencies that are participatory in these important decisions, don't you think it's impossible that, or don't you think it's very important that individuals with disabilities be at that table so that everyone is reminded of the importance of these decisions? We have planning.
Yeah.
Do we have somebody with a disability that's integrated into these, not just for testimony, because we can hold testimony here all the time, but when you walk in that room that you're reminded of those priorities constantly while that process moves forward?
We do not at this time have a specific role for someone representing people with disabilities, but we could expand the proposal review committee if that was
I'd like
something
to ask you to have
about.
a specific response to that,
Okay.
so that as we move forward in this budget process, we know that that's being attended to. And of course,
Sure.
I will anticipate that you support the expansion of the city's housing trust fund.
Yes, of course.
Very good. And Jane and Holly, I want to thank you for the time that you gave us to testify today. We can identify some concrete strategies that Philadelphia can move forward in a positive way. You talked about the Section 811 authority and how the city can expand the supply of special needs and disability units within the city. You talked about specific projects that were successful, and can you please inform us so that we're aware of your processes? What barriers specifically did you remove so that the city could bring the resources of PHFA and HUD to the city, and how can we get better at that? I'm sure that your experience was...
What's interesting is you say, removing barriers. I think one of the biggest things that
I'm sorry?
You said one of the things, what are the barriers?
What I'm interested in is, what was your experience in dealing with those barriers? How did you overcome them? And what barriers continue to stand in the way of our success?
I think, as Deborah mentioned earlier, it's really finding some of those financial supports that 811 will give to a development to be able to do it. One of the things PHFA did a number of years ago is allowed a developer to get an additional developer fee if that was pledged back in to support the operations of a project. So we're setting up what's called a rental subsidy fund, and that's targeted for individuals at or below 20% area median income, below the typical 30% level, so that there'll be ongoing supports for 15 years to fill the gaps of some of those issues in placing. So I think that's one of the things, is finding the operating support that 811 will bring to the table. Also, building an incentive in the allocation plan. I'm not sure that there's barriers necessarily. I think by us creating incentives in our allocation plan, which gives points, and it's a competitive process, that really encourages developers to meet the needs of persons with special needs. So I think it's that incentive and encouraging through points and competitiveness that we actually are able to increase those opportunities.
Let me ask you a hypothetical. Let's say Tom Wolf, hopefully our new best friend, is sitting at the table here with me. How would you suggest that we, as a city, become a better partner with the Wolf administration and your agency? And what types of interdepartmental holistic initiatives do you see the state taking on, both now and under the new administration, that can impact us here?
I think that one of the opportunities is really through the Department of Human Services, and understanding at the Department of Human Services the role of housing and supportive service linkages. I think that's a great opportunity. Under the previous administration, there was some more partnership between the two, and I think to the extent that you can create, there is a role at housing.
There was better partnerships, or?
I wouldn't say that there was. I think there was a different opportunity for long-term living, had more communications with PHFA to sort of bridge the gap of nursing home transition in some of these issues. I'm not sure that there was a focus in the last administration, but I think that that's the opportunity to build on some of the existing partnerships that was previously in play, to continue that conversation between DHS and the housing advocates so that we can bridge the gap in permanent supportive housing.
Could you perhaps think in terms of creating an email or a framework on how we can best approach that conversation?
I will do that and
Thank
send it to you.
And Jane, I have a couple questions for you as well. And I guess it will be a general question, because you identify all these funding sources, and we're going to have the cleanup hitter coming up in a few minutes. So not to put too much of a burden on her, but I'm sure she's been auditing all the testimony that has taken place so far, and I'm anxiously awaiting her insight and her constructive ideas going forward. But do you have any recommendations on how we in Philadelphia can be better at leveraging programs offered by HUD? Is there, if you could suggest how we could build a better framework to better engage formally and informally with your agency?
I would say that in my tenure at HUD, the last approximately 4.5 years, I have been very pleased at my engagement with the partners here at the table. I would be happy to continue to have the conversation and to open a conversation specifically around the needs with individuals with disabilities. But I can tell you, I think we have regular conversations about how we can better provide housing and better make use of the resources that we do have. This is a very open group.
Yeah, I am just interested in being included in those discussions so that some of the people that provide the support services can participate in your planning strategies, because it is the three-legged stool. So again, I think, Holly, you were talking about all kinds of tax credits, and that really just goes a little over my head because it's all rushing past me very quickly. But can you suggest how we can maximize the value of those tax credits by minimizing the cost of development to serve more people while maintaining independence? Is that too loaded?
That's too loaded, and that's really a challenge. I think as many of us practitioners are in the room, you know, it really does create, it takes a village and takes a lot of leveraging from a number of resources. I think to the extent that there are more partners and partnerships with a broad-based group, which is happening in Philadelphia. I think if you look at who's at the table, whether it's the foundations with the city support and also the agencies, a lot of it is just still driven by the tax incentive, which also is counterintuitive, quite frankly, to some of those things. So again, I think the more collaborative the development is and the more partners, I think each one of us can just give a little piece that will then leverage more. It is still a challenge to get developments, and many of them are, I think, as you mentioned earlier, some of the NIMBY challenges that also create some cost or timing issues in getting a development coming from start to fruition. So it is just not, unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all. Believe me, I spent many days looking at budgets and figuring out which line you can eliminate to figure out how to cost constrain, and it is a holistic, very challenging approach.
Thank you. Councilman O, do you have any questions? I do not. Well, thank you very much for your testimony. And now we have a vision for the future. And I hope she's feeling well today, because I would like to welcome the esteemed Estelle Richmond, the former COO, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Welfare, now the Department of Health and Human Services. But I have, Madam Secretary, I guess I could call you that because that's the role that I'm most familiar with, and your previous expertise in the city, which you will articulate in a few moments. But it was your management style that I think initially attracted me to your vision, and that was no matter where you are, you bring a number of agencies that report to you, and you force that collaboration and that inclusiveness and that transparency, and you encourage the sharing of wonderful creative ideas. So we're very pleased to have you here, and if you could identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony, we would appreciate it.
Good morning, Councilman O'Brien and Speaker O'Brien, since that's how we worked, and members of the committee. I am Estelle Richmond. I'm happily retired from the workforce, and I'm honored to be here with you today. In the past 48 years, I've held the following positions in 2 states. In Cleveland, Ohio, I worked as a social worker for child welfare, program director and administrator for the Positive Education Program, a day treatment program for children with behavioral problems, and the executive director of a community social services agency, which provided community mental health services and health clinic services. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I worked in the following positions: Southeast Regional Administrator in the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the Department of Public Welfare, and the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare, now the Department of Human Services. In Philadelphia, I served as Mental Health Director, MHMR Administrator, MHMR CODAP Administrator, the Commissioner of Health, Deputy Managing Director for Social Services, and the City Managing Director. At the federal level, I was the Chief Operating Officer for Housing and Urban Development and Special Advisor to the HUD Secretary on Health and Human Services issues. I list this variety of positions to state that regardless of the position, the title, the responsibilities, or the location, the primary barrier to long-term stability for people with disabilities has been housing. With safe, affordable, supported, permanent, integrated, accessible housing, people are less likely to become homeless, less likely to be incarcerated or to be institutionalized in intermediate care facilities for mental retardation, state mental hospitals, or nursing facilities. With safe, affordable, supported, permanent, integrated, accessible housing, people are likely to decrease the time of relapse, increase the probability of employment, comradeship, and self-sufficiency. Housing is the basis of stability in the community. However, it represents the highest cost item in bringing people out of institutions or avoiding institutions. In addition, housing must be linked to services of the person's choice. Services are more than medical treatment and should include social supports, vocational supports, religious supports, and family supports. The purpose of this hearing is to highlight the importance of housing resources for all types of disabilities. Today we've heard from 3 panels. The first talked about the people. People with physical disabilities, people with mental disabilities or addictions, people who are homeless, and young people with autism. Without appropriate housing, each of these populations risk homelessness, incarceration, hospitalization, or nursing facility care. With appropriate housing and supports, these are our neighbors, our friends, and our coworkers. With appropriate housing and supports, they can contribute to society, communities, and neighborhoods. Over the next several years, we can expect many of these populations to grow substantially, particularly aging and youth with autism. The second panel spoke to the development of affordable housing. We know the need is great. We also know that funding is insufficient to the need. However, our developers fight to make every dollar count and to ensure that people with disabilities are not forgotten. Calvin Jeremiah, Mark Dichter, and Gavin Kerr represent only 3 of the many developers in the city. They are partners with many other agencies. They have learned to leverage funds and to stretch them as far as possible. However, we're still far from reaching a goal of having appropriate housing for all. To quote Sister Mary, none of us are home until all of us are home. The third panel represents the funders. This is somewhat of a misnomer because these groups actually distribute funds as opposed to create the funds. The real funders are us, the taxpayers. All of the funds that are distributed by these agencies, HUD, PFHA, OHCD, come from taxpayers. They all follow laws, regulations, and policies. Their missions commit them to work in partnerships with developers to create housing opportunities for people with disabilities, to promote home ownership, and to collaborate with other levels of government to keep people out of institutions. The developers must work in partnership with social service agencies and Medicaid managed care entities, both behavioral and physical, to ensure supports for special needs populations. But again, we, the taxpayers, determine how much money is going to be available. If we can state that in lots of different ways, but it still comes down to people needing to generate funds, develop funds, and match funds. As the cleanup batter, I want to reemphasize 3 points. First, permanent supported integrated community living is cost effective. 2, the Supreme Court Olmstead decision mandates that people with disability have a right to live in permanent community-based housing. And 3, it's all about appropriate supports. These are simple concepts. For each person in an institution, whether it be a state mental facility, a nursing facility, or an ICFMR, more than 2 people can be supported in the community. We have long known that supporting people in integrated community-based housing is more cost-effective than having people in institutions. Whether an individual is in a state mental institution, an institution for people with mental retardation, a nursing facility, a jail, or a detention center, it is more cost-effective to provide services in the community. Supports in the community means treatment supports, housing supports, employment supports, and case management. Some individuals will require some of these, others only one. But as a group, people living in safe, affordable, permanent supported housing have less use of emergency room, lower rehospitalization rates, and more positive interactions with peers. As we think again of the providers, often in the health and human services field, and the housing developers, often focused on bricks, mortar, and banking leverage, we need to think of a system that understands both. The developers here today understand their role in assuring that housing for people with disabilities must include supports. However, it is not the intent that housers fund the supports, but they partner with those who can. It is also not the intent that human services agencies become real estate brokers, but instead partner with housing developers. If we don't do this work in silos, we will never have enough housing or supports. If we can work in partnerships, we can envision going to scale. I want to spend my final minutes on the Olmstead Decree. Olmstead is a clarification of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and the ADA. It prohibits discrimination in rental, sale, and financing of housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, presence of children, or disability. Section 504 of the Fair Housing Act states that persons with disabilities, including those individuals transitioning from institutions to community-based settings, are entitled to equal opportunity in housing. Fair Housing, Meet Americans with Disabilities Act. Title II of the ADA requires public entities to administer services, programs, and activities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of the qualified individuals with disabilities. The most integrated setting is defined as a setting that enables individuals with disabilities to interact with non-disabled persons to the fullest extent possible. In 1999, the Supreme Court ruled in Olmstead versus LC that people with disabilities have the right to live in integrated communities with supports. Permanent supported housing provides permanent housing with the necessary social, employment, and medical supports. Slowly, we are working towards an integrated society. We are not there yet, but if those in this room work in partnership, understands their roles, and vow that we will keep people with physical disabilities, people with mental illness and addictions, people with intellectual disabilities, and people with autism out of institutions, we will make progress. All of us deserve a home. What are the next steps we all can do? First, support funding of the Housing Trust Fund. Contact your elected state officials. Support the Community First option, a new state plan option. And third, support increasing the set-aside for housing for people with special needs and those with very low incomes to 10% from 5%. Again, from Project Home, none of us are home until all of us are home. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. Again, it's your leadership that focused us all on bringing people out of institutions into the community. And I think your testimony here today also reemphasizes that unless we have the supports, we can't avoid those individuals being reinstitutionalized. And that, again, I thank you for particularly focusing on the aging and youth with autism. Again, 20,000 adults by the year 2020. I'd like to start a process where instead of having a waiting list or an interest list, that we look at the year 2020 and have a strategic plan on how we can best build capacity and not wait till 2020 and say all of a sudden we have a tsunami or we have an emergency. And again, you talk about the developers working in partnership with community social service agencies like Medicaid, managed care entities, behavioral and physical health to ensure supports for special needs population. It is all about the supports, and those supports are treatment, housing, employment, case management, and I'm glad that you defined the roles as these new partnerships come together. And that specifically is that we're not asking housers to fund the supports, but partner with those that can. And your initiatives are, again, well within our grasp as City Council to support increased funding for the Housing Fund. If you can, maybe you can expand and further explain the Community First option, the new state option, and I'm on it. I would love to introduce legislation increasing the state or the set-aside for housing for people with special needs from 5% to 10%, and thank you for your testimony. I do have a couple questions. I want to thank you for coming out of retirement. I don't think you'll ever retire. No one ever believes that you ever really did retire, as evidenced by your testimony here today. But based on your experience at HUD, DPW, DHS, in our own city, what steps can be taken to reduce or eliminate the need for expensive and segregated nursing facilities and other institutional settings like the Philadelphia Nursing Home?
For all nursing facilities, it's where DPW or DHS now spent the majority of their funding. And we know that, one, it's the hardest decision for people to make. We know that people don't want to be in nursing homes, and we know we spend more money on nursing homes than any other factor in the DHS budget. The object now, and there are many waivers, is to begin to reduce that number substantially. And there are lots of ways, I believe, the state is beginning to look at it. We're going to probably, I would hope that within the next 12 months, we will see long-term managed care focused on getting more people out of nursing homes faster. I think the dollars saved could be both those dollars that could help develop more housing for people with disabilities, to make sure people coming out of nursing homes have places to live, and for youth with autism. This will free up a great deal of money as we begin to downsize. I will have to tell you, I've probably been advocating for significant downsizing of the Philadelphia nursing home.
I'm aware of that.
For a long time. And I think that one of the things about the Philadelphia nursing home, which I sort of look at Tom Earl to see if it's still true, it had one of the highest percentages of people under 50. And the people under 50 in a nursing home means we have a housing problem. It is not a service issue, it's a housing issue, because most of those folks can live comfortably, independently, and accessibly in the community if housing was there for them to do, plus saving money. Because, as I think I mentioned, it's more effective, it's more cost effective to be able to be supported in the community. The last number I saw was still over 2 people can live in the community for every person in a nursing facility. The last part of this is that the Department of Human Services is at the state level, is one of the largest housing developers. Yet it's not a coordinated effort. And I think the new secretary will be looking at creating a housing office within DHS to help create and make use of all of the appropriate housing there. So money is wisely spent. It's communicated back down to the counties on how that collaboration will work. And consequently, I hope more housing can be developed.
So given that statement, I think it would probably be, or maybe it's not, premature to ask you to make suggestions to our largest housing agencies, PHA and OHCD, as to what they can do to move forward. Or perhaps you can give them some ideas on how they can fit into this new framework that's going to be created.
I would be very glad to. Now, I do believe that PHFA has always been a great partner with both DHS and and with the city. And I think, as Holly mentioned, that they were very amenable to looking at very low-income people and looking at how we make sure that we are not leaving anyone behind as we develop housing. It was a great deal of pressure also to work with HUD as we developed the new 811 program, which focused on integration, not segregating people with disabilities, and making sure there were a source of funds flowing into states that help people get out of nursing facilities and out of all institutions. Now we need to build on those. Now we need to be able to look at how counties and how other communities in general take advantage of targeting populations most at risk. You know, as you said, the number of youth with autism will grow substantially by 2020. We've known about the baby boomers for the last 25 years, and knowing they're going to hit our housing market and our care market significantly. We also know most of the baby boomers don't want to live in nursing facilities. We want to age in place. We want to be able to be with friends and family and not put away. We have moved way too slowly for this initiative, although I think we will probably be pretty strong in insisting that more housing be developed. But that's for aging, and while I'm part of that group now, I have just as much interest in making sure people with disabilities, youth with autism, youth aging out of the child welfare system, all need housing. We should not be playing one group against another, but trying to make sure that all of us have housing as appropriate to our needs, not in institutions.
I think when I first met you, you were creating what is now known as CBH. And a lot of people said that can't work, it'll be political, they won't have the reserves. Well, it became a reality and it's working very well.
Incidentally, just the first of the month, it celebrated its 18th anniversary.
That's wonderful. Now, let me ask you, what do you think the future of CBH will look like, given the changes on a national level to healthcare and the new administration in Harrisburg? I read that you have more than a passing interest in this.
I think that one of the things we'll hear over the next weeks will be the reintegration of health choices to one plan, not three. I think, as our new governor has said, he's interested in the broadest level of Medicaid expansion, and I think we will hear the plans for that over the next few weeks. I think that means that CBH will continue to function and be a strong, vibrant organization. I think that it will also mean they hopefully will have more reinvestment funds to continue to invest in housing for people with mental illness, addictions, and homelessness. So, I think that hopefully the American for Affordable Care will continue to exist and to make sure that all Americans have health care, and that health care isn't just a privilege for some, but for all. When all those things come together with housing, because I really don't believe you can have strong, good health care if people don't have a stable place to be home.
I'm going to ask you a question. As I approach my advanced years, and all that you have just said, what is the definition of retirement in Estelle Richmond's terms?
My definition of retirement
is
it's a little unique. I have two things that I do. I travel, so I do a trip a month. So as long as I can do a trip a month, I consider myself retired. And the work I do for free.
Well, it's inspiring, as you always have been on a city level, on a state level, and on a federal level. Your accomplishments are too numerous and profound to talk about today, but we just thank you for gifting us part of that free advice that you are so willing to share with so many other people.
And I'm willing to do whatever support and work I can do, given my caveats.
Thank you. Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you very much. For next steps, obviously we understand what you mean by contacting our state officials on Housing Trust Fund. The Community First option, so we contact our elected officials, our governor and such, Community First?
It would be making sure that the governor knows, and I will make sure that the DHS secretary is aware of the Community First option. It's not a Medicaid waiver, it's an option, so it's a little bit broader and will give us more flexibility of making sure we can, one, keep people out of nursing facilities, and secondly, be able to support them in the community.
And thirdly, thank you, for increasing the set-aside, I assume, is that federal?
No, both the federal, the state, and local can make decisions on what that set-aside can be. The issue for the set-aside, though, is it has to be able to actually look at the number of people who qualify for it. And in other words, if you say 5%, but it's reaching the lowest 5%, that's good. But if you're saying 5%, but you have to have an income above the poverty level, then it's not going to work for our thank you, for our folks who need it the most, because they don't have that income. One of the things I know that the Philadelphia Housing Authority, when many people lost their GA payments, which they used to pay their rent, they were able to call them zero income and still kept them in their housing. So the goal is to make sure some of our most vulnerable people have housing regardless of their income, come up with ways for subsidy, or come up with ways to be able to reach them.
So we can work on that on all 3 levels.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Estelle. Is there anyone else here to testify today? Seeing no one is here to testify regarding Resolution 150028, and there being no further business before the Committee on the Disabled and Special Needs today, the public hearing on Resolution 150026. Wait a minute, do I have that number? 28 is recessed until the call of the chair. Thank you all for coming.